Welcome to Season 6 of the One Inside an Internal Family Systems podcast. I'm Tammy Sallenberger, author of The One Inside 30 Days to Your Authentic Self. This podcast is for anyone curious about their inner world and who have a desire to connect to that authentic self. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I am super excited today to have my friend, Julie Honeycutt, who has been on the podcast before, probably almost at the beginning, right? It was
I
a long
think
time
so.
ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
Julie is a licensed professional counselor, certified IFS therapist for over 15 years, approved clinical consultant for the IFS Institute. She's been practicing integrating faith and counseling for over 20 years. She's moved around a lot. We have lots of friends in common, and you've been in Virginia for a while. I think when I first met you, you were involved in the IFS Institute in what was that, like a
Yeah, John
diversity or
Schwartz.
something?
Yeah,
Yes,
he
yes.
he spearheaded the diversity and inclusion committee that started with a panel discussion at one of the conferences. And so,
Yes.
yeah, it was a beautifully diverse experience. But then we kept on meeting as a committee every other week for 3 years, and just
Wow.
talked about how can we make IFS more accessible to the marginalized, including religious marginalized.
And
Yeah,
this was a long time ago. I mean, this was how many years
yeah.
ago? I feel like it was a
Oh
long time
gosh,
ago.
it was. I couldn't even tell you. Been here 4 years, and before that, so maybe 7 years is when it started.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So let's start where we always start, which is where you are in the world, because you're in a different place than we were when we last met. So where are you in the world, and what do you see when you look out your nearest window?
Yeah, so literally, I, set up my home office to look out the window at my garden, which is then backdropped with, acres of woods. So my garden is vegetables and flowers, and I've been told it looks like a Peter Rabbit garden, just to give listeners the visual image. So I wasn't going for that, but the soil here is clay, and so I ended up doing all raised beds, which wasn't my original vision. But you work with what you have. So it's very lush right now because it's just the peak of the season.
Mm,
Bird watching and everything happens from here, and
mm,
it's peaceful, and it represents the rootedness of
mm.
my heart's desire, my husband's heart's desire, to not move around so much anymore. So we're hoping that Lynchburg, Virginia, will be home for a very, very long time.
How long have you guys been
Yeah.
there now? Like
We're
here?
coming up on 4 years, and
Wow.
a
Okay.
little interesting, I think this will convey a little bit about my attachment style, which we'll get into
Mm.
later in our talk. We moved every 2 years, and we've been married 18 years. And so even if it was in the same town, we had to relocate homes for whatever reason, and, but we've lived, about gosh, I couldn't even count 8 different places. So yes, this is rootedness for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about that because let's jump into that. When we think about your attachment style and how that relates to spirituality.
First, I wanna address, your listeners, by, saying that this conceptualization of attachment style and spirituality and prayer, it relates to everybody. Anyone who, either believes in a higher power or has a different religion than I do, or just people who heavily rely on guides, that it's all relevant. So I just wanna invite everybody to this conversation, even though I will be using language from my tradition as an Eastern Orthodox Christian. IFS has been adapted as a pathway to spirituality for many religions and even non-religious. So I just wanna to say that on the front end.
I love that. I love that because I was thinking about when you and I were talking about what we were talking about. I was thinking about prayer and like a spiritual practice, like, and how we all have these spiritual practices, no matter what spirituality we are. Even I don't think there's anybody who's actually not spiritual at all. Like there is some sort of spirituality, and we all either have them or want to have practices that connect us to either the highest self. Sometimes in IFS language, we'll say the highest self or the source or the universe or God the Father or Jesus, or whoever that is or whatever that is, that prayer. So I was thinking about this, like, is prayer a practice for connection? But I'm wondering, I know we're going to talk about attachment, but I'm wondering about as an Enneagram. So I'm an Enneagram 3, you're an Enneagram 2. So I was thinking, am I only saying that because I'm a 3 and we're in the heart center and connection's important to us? So am I only saying prayer for connection because of my personality type?
That's such a good question. I wonder how, people in the other heart centers would conceptualize prayer. We know that the Judeo-Christian invitation is relationship, and that prayer is about connection, in its essence, and just, like, our response to that invitation has to do with our parts and how our parts all have their own attachment styles. Of course, we have our dominant parts and we have our dominant attachment styles, that come from all that, but the idea that all God would want a relationship with all of our parts, and to even think about, um, the parts that most of us carry shame around, that He wants a relationship with those parts too. It's truly mind-blowing, and it's very real.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. And so I'm hearing something that people will often not argue about, but will often say, like, do I have one attachment style
Mhm.
or do my parts have different attachment styles? I feel like you kind of just answered that, but I'm curious what you think about that. Because usually it's like, this is my attachment style.
Mhm.
So I'm curious about
Yeah.
that.
I think a little review could be useful just for everyone who's listening, that our attachment styles are, complex, and that, the the ways in which we lead, ourselves, right? Whether we're leading from, a part that has an insecure attachment style, a part that has, a secure attachment style, or a disorganized one, or an anxious avoidant one. I hear it, referenced as, like, they're all anxious. Even the secure attachment is still anxious because we're human. And yes, we have healthy parts, thank God, but we, our anxiety as human beings is ever present. It's just one of those human conditions, and that the IFS model is a method for healing, not so much that we ever, like, get rid of our anxiety. Of course, we don't get rid of any parts, right? But that we can help comfort those anxieties, and prayer being one of those, resources for that comfort. So I know for myself, um, I'll just jump right into this example that comes to my mind, that knowing my primary attachment style informs, the ebb and flow of my relationship with God. And so I'll go through seasons, and a lot of times it coincides or parallels with the liturgical calendar, but a lot of times it doesn't. But I'll go through seasons where, I'm all in. I have a daily practice. The rhythms are there, the connection is there. And then I'll go through seasons where I am a 2 on the Enneagram, but I have a heavy 3 wing. So I love to do things. And so those super productive phases, of life and throughout the year, I'm less likely to sit and meditate and do my listening prayer and have that connection with God in the depth. I might have what I call, texting prayers. I just, shoot up prayers all day long, but they're just like little texts. But there's not that true, like, abiding and, like, real deep connection that actually ministers to my parts. So in that ebb and flow, I have an inner critic who, she tries to get me to, sit down and pray, or to do any kind of, like, significant self-care. And, IFS has helped me work with that critic in a way that helps that, part, that the critic feel appreciated for how she's trying to help me be, more, fully in communion, with God. more, what's the word I'm looking for? Congruent, consistent, in my self-nurture, to respond to the invitation that I feel like God has extended to me. Um, so with that work, I've been able to, by God's grace, I should say, been able to find that middle ground of feeling, into the anxious avoidant parts of me in relationship with God. So when I'm like, okay, I've got a ton of things I want to get done this morning, I'm a morning person, and my introvert tendency, right, that anxious avoidance can come out and be like, I can't, I can't slow down enough to be with God. And when I do end up slowing down enough to listen to the part that says that, then what I hear is this sense of like, it has to do with capacity, like this inability. This part of me literally says, um, I cannot tolerate so much goodness. And when I had that experience by listening to my parts, realizing that God's goodness was too much for this part, oh my goodness, I had so much more compassion for like, well, no wonder it's hard to sit in the kind of prayer that is that deep, deep, abiding, intimate way of praying. And so that's where IFS and attachment and all the things are so helpful in prayer life.
I love that. So, what I'm hearing you say is, um, if we want to establish some sort of prayer practice, or many of us in the IFS world, even if it's checking with my parts every day, that kind of thing. But if there's a prayer practice that I want to establish, I want to do every day, and I'm not doing it, that may be related to my attachment style. So that's what I'm hearing you say. Maybe it's related to my attachment style. And so I can use IFS to get to know the parts of me that are connected to my attachment style that are keeping me from praying or doing that spiritual practice, whatever that is.
Yes, and I shared a personal experience, but this is the work I do. I see this be the case so many times, and how transformative it is for people to be able to meet themselves where they are and realize, "Oh, God wants to meet me here too. Okay, he's not mad that I'm not sitting down and doing my practice."
We get these ideas, I feel like, from like religious trauma or even kind of like family trauma around the religious parts that are like, this is what it looks like. Like, these are the specific things. Like, you have to have your quiet time and it has to be in the morning. And yeah, so you want to talk a little
So,
bit about that?
yeah, the listeners cannot see the big smirk on my face
Yeah.
right now. Because it actually isn't even about trauma. Of course, it can be, and it certainly becomes more evident in our offices, when we're sitting with people when it is, trauma related. But in my study of, spiritual formation, when we look at the levels of faith, we see that the first 2 in particular are all about, creating the scaffolding that we need in order to develop, a firm, strong foundation, to be able to then build into, to deepen into the mystery and into the unknowns and the undefinable and the cloud of unknowing, the dark brightness. All there's all these words in scripture and authors that reference this higher level spirituality, and this has been my journey with IFS and in my faith, has been so much fun because IFS basically is teaching higher level spirituality by talking about, or by giving the how to of accessing core self. So I'm going to take a little side note here, Tammy, for our IFS practitioners and therapists out there, and give a little, window into how we can actually be doing a disservice sometimes to those that we sit with by jumping right into insight work, where we're inviting them to unblend from these protectors that have been doing their job their whole life. Because imagine that in the levels of faith, we have parts that are so level 1 and 2. I guess I should rewind a little and talk about that's the recognition of God and the learning about God and learning how God works. Um, and in that process of learning how does religion work? Why do I need God? All those conceptualizations, that's the foundational scaffolding that we're then building upon. So, um, when we're in a level 2 space where we're saying to ourselves, like, if I pray, then, God will be pleased with me. We're pulling on our attachment from our parents. Right? We're pulling on our attachment from our teachers, from all the authorities in our lives who have told us, if you behave a certain way, I will be pleased with you. So that gets projected onto God in level 2. Level 3, we're very productive in our faith. Ironically, the Enneagram 3 parallels beautifully with level 3 of spirituality. I'll say more about that later if you want. But, level 4 is when we're questioning everything. It's the deconstruction process. And that's usually when people show up in our offices, where they are trying to figure out, okay, I've been realizing like life is way more than 2 plus 2 equals 4. And help me figure out which way is up. And so when we come to IFS therapy, if we're jumping right into insight work, we're jumping into what we call level 5. And level 5 is where we've already learned how to embrace the mystery. We've gone through the dark night of the soul and we've come out on the other side enlightened, if you will. And in that space of level 5 is where insight work can feel so easy, because the parts have learned how to surrender and they're just easy, not in the sense of can, yeah, easy is probably not the best word. Smooth, maybe. Um, the least resistance would be someone in level 5. So, all that to say, if we're sitting with people who have parts in level 2, who have the belief system that if they, we call it formula thinking in spiritual direction. Like if I pray, read my Bible, go to church, then life will be okay. Or I will be all right. Things will go my way. And that's not how life works. So that's usually what brings people to level 4 crisis, brings them into our offices. So when we help people connect with core self, we're it's beautiful that we do it. And so this is a both and. It is helpful to be mindful that there are parts of them still in the space that level 5 function of being able to connect to core self and sit in the beauty of that is very confusing and uncomfortable for those parts at the lower levels of faith. And that integration of those parts is very healing and redemptive. Now, a lot of times this happens organically. I may be probably naming something like, well, yeah, that's automatically happening. I find with a lot of clients, it's not automatically happening because there's so much shame around. I know I'm not supposed to think that way. I know that that's childish thinking and et cetera, et cetera. I'm better than that now. I know that's not how God works. I know He loves me for who I am, is the dominant voice. So it's a slight version of spiritual bypassing that can happen. So I've been saying a lot. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I no, I love this. Okay, so there are these 5, um, what did you call them? Phases?
So there's 7 and
Okay,
there's
there's 7.
levels of faith, and I use the word
Okay.
level on
Levels.
purpose
Okay.
because it's, like a staircase is the best way to imagine it. So,
Okay.
if you're coming to IFS therapy, you're in IFS therapy, you're engaging parts from self, and that has become like your new way of life, then you're at least at level 5, maybe 6. And these parts that we're talking about that carry these burdens about how life is supposed to work with faith, um, are at level 2. So imagine a staircase. You're on level 5. You're looking down the staircase, and you can
Mm.
see parts at all the different levels. And this is what we can then see the different parts in the different levels of faith.
I love that. I love that. Okay, I love that. And so then if I'm hanging out on the 5th stair and I'm feeling all good about that, I might even have my back turned towards the parts at
Yeah.
these lower levels because either I don't want to admit, right, the parts of me that don't want to admit that they're there, or parts of me that are like, I'm already at level 5. I don't want to turn around to those levels. I don't want to go back to those parts. But we know that those parts are going to be there and they're going to be impeding, which I'm gonna put in quotes, my practice or
Yeah.
my goal, I'm gonna put that in quotes too, of having
Mhm.
like a more spiritual life, whatever
Yeah.
however I wanna define that, like a more
Yes.
spiritually connected life
Yeah, I
or
love that.
self-led life or
Exactly.
whatever that is that I feel like we all have in common. Like we wanna be
Mhm.
more self-led, we wanna be more spiritually led.
Right. Yeah, more connected, I think, is, like, that word that you were wondering about earlier, and that it does come back down to connection. Yeah. We're
Yeah.
created for relationship with something beyond ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, how do you help people? And I love what you said. So, I guess I want to ask, like, how do you help people kind of identify this and kind of work through it? And I also want to just name that you talked about that third level and the Enneagram 3 parts that are like do, because we see this in church life too. Like I
Mm.
remember like when I was in my 20s at one point, like I was like this very 3 of me that I was like involved in women's ministry and helping with a preschool and had, like, a teenage, girls group that I was running, like
And, and,
and, and,
and.
and, 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 yeah. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, so 3 is where that level 3 is where we just start doing and being active and, like and thinking that's yeah, they can be curious, right? Is that gonna earn me favor? Is that gonna earn me, like, happy life? Or, is
Yeah.
that what the spiritual life is about? Do, 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 do,
Right.
do.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of a lot of church, emphasis is about offering back, right, and serving, and so level 6 is oftentimes confused with level 3. So level
Mm,
3 would be the burdened version, to put this in IFS language, of doing to earn, approval, doing to even earn, like, your own spiritual identity, like, just to kinda
yeah,
figure out, "Who
yeah,
am I in
yeah.
God's eyes?" Or, "Who am I in the role of the church?" And until we go through a genuine dark night of the soul, where genuine meaning, like, we're actually asking the hard questions and deciding, "Okay, no, this faith stuff still makes sense for me. I'm still gonna lean into it, and I'm gonna come out on the other side with, a different container." Not that we get rid of our old container, but that we expand it. Sometimes it gets broken in order to expand it, and it literally feels like our world is shattering, until we go through some sort of experience that reshapes us and helps us start to consider reconstructing our faith. We cannot give back from an authentic place, which, of course, IFS calls self. So our self-led parts um, grow out of the refining fire of that dark night of the soul. So our level 3 parts have their journey to then go into level 6, which is the name of level 6 is love expanded.
Oh,
Right.
wow.
Isn't that beautiful?
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
So I have a little story about my 3 parts. So I had paint on my hands this morning because I was outside painting in our nice cool morning here. And I was like noticing I have very significant project parts. I have a whole team of what used to be self-improvement parts, and they've been re-rolled to, improvement of my exterior world. And so they still have a job, but they just don't do soul work. And so as I was doing this project, I was literally painting stairs. So there's an imagery there. And just thinking about and praying about how I pray best when I'm moving and doing something. And so those parts that are in our bodies, they wanna pray too, but they're not gonna be the ones that sit and read a prayer or sit and say a prayer. They're gonna be the parts that wanna pray and express connection to God through movement. A lot of people talk about how hiking is good for them for that, being in nature, and so on. So, I was sitting on the stairs painting the handrail, and, my 3 parts were feeling very satisfied. And, I was sitting there, I was, like, praying for other people, and then I noticed, I was like, that's the 6. My 3 energy is creating space to be able to love others through intercessory prayer, which as an introvert is a lifeline for me because I'm not one to, just be out in the social settings of service, and so intercessory prayer has been my way, my introvert parts, their way, of being able to feel, um, connected to others, but connected to them through God, and without having to, be something they're not, and so, like, that anxious avoidant tendency for my introvertedness gets to show up in prayer, if
Yeah,
that is
it
making
does.
sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, so
I
no one's
love that.
excluded.
Yeah, I love that. Right. It doesn't well, yeah, it doesn't have to look a certain way, and I think that's where we think about prayer, that prayer has to look a certain we all I don't wanna say this broadly, but, like, I my guess is traditionally, right, there's an idea that prayer looks like this, and my guess is even not just with, like, Christians, but that probably across cultures that, like, this is what spirituality looks like, or this is what prayer looks like.
Absolutely, yeah, I mean, the ritual and the tradition that we see in movies, for those of us who don't practice, other religions, it's very evident, that the religious orders or the churches, they have to teach something, right? They have to teach some sort of concrete, "This is how we pray." But then, what would it be like if our prayer life could reflect the unique way that God made us? And so this way of and this the saints throughout the ages, even before Jesus was here, the Jewish tradition is full of this as well. These creative ways of praying that add to the traditional ways. That the traditional ways, just like level 1 and 2 parts, they don't go away and they don't our goal is not to pull them up into the higher levels. Our goal is to help them do what they do in level 1, 2, and 3 the way God intended them to do it, to fulfill their truest purpose. So we build on the traditional prayers by adding creative prayer. The mystics are an example of that. Labyrinth walks, praying with color is a popular new way to pray. There's the ideas just go on and on.
Yeah. It's funny you say that about the mystics because that's exactly what I was thinking is, like, when we read and learn from the mystics, we see a very different way of like, we see a very, I think, Eastern way of being and experiencing God in this very, very different way. That in my experience, it's very different than how I was taught. Like, yeah, so, yeah, and it feels like to me those ways, like you talked about the cloud of unknowing, and so those like that path just feel it's just my experience is like it just feels very different and more connected to me, like more attuned and connected with my experience.
Yeah, and you mentioned about like you're in your 20s being taught to pray a certain way. Um, so I when I came to IFS, as a clinician first and then did my own work, and in that work, my inner twenty-something, right, thought that she was supposed to, embrace the mystical the same way as my forty-something part, and giving her permission, be like, "No, if you wanna sit down with your Bible and do the notes and do the commentary, like, if that's what brings you peace, that's how you do it. And there's some other ways of prayer that are extremely life-giving for me as I lean into my uniqueness and how God made me. And so we might not do the traditional way of praying as often, um, but it's not like one becomes better than another. It's really about what parts are needing what kind of prayer. Actually, so I lead a retreat, led one last year, and we've got another one coming up next April called Parts in Prayer, and created this handout, that kind of it almost looks like an algorithm. I don't know what my brain was doing when I created it, but it's just that it kinda matches, like, if you're this personality style, if you're this Enneagram number, these are the kind of prayers that might be, best fitted for you. Um, I might modify it. I eventually wanna write something around it. Who knows what that will end up being, but modifying it with the levels of faith in mind, because developmentally, in our 20s and even sometimes into our 30s, we aren't ready for that deeper mystical experience of the divine. We wouldn't know what to do with it. I wouldn't have known what to do with it in my 20s. And so there's like this sense of just human development is a thing, right? Psychological development is a thing. So is spiritual development. Sometimes we cannot come into something until we are really ready for it. And that's something to keep in mind, I think, for our clients, the people we sit with. If I have a client coming in and they're in their 20s, their ability to access core self is going to be very different, possibly, depending on their formation and their overall development.
That's fascinating. Okay, so I love that. I do have parts that are like, it's this or this or this or this or A or B or black or white. So I'm like, oh yeah, this is so interesting. So it's different parts can pray or sort of have a spiritual connection in the way that they want to. And then there's Enneagram type, and then there's attachment style, and then and then there's all these different nuances of, like, personality and stage of life that are all gonna contribute to your prayer and your spiritual life and your
Yeah,
IFS life, like, your way that you
yeah,
can connect to self and yourself can connect to parts.
yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, and that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? So, like, yeah, we have temperament, we have sensory input, output styles, we have learning styles, processing styles, all that's in my workshop, or my retreat. Yeah, and I love, the Enneagram, the way I love to conceptualize it is I have a one part, right? I have a reformer. I have all 9 parts inside of me, and typically all of those 9 parts have their own team. Like they all have a cluster of parts that help them all function. And my early training, I was fortunate to get trained in the Enneagram from a Jungian analyst, back in 2000. And so, yeah, over 25 years ago. Crazy. Um, and he taught and, he emphasized, I should say, that our goal is to move around the Enneagram, and when we move around it, meaning, so if you're a 3 and you've learned about all your threeness and you've embraced your threeness, you can move on to having a different dominant part. And typically we start with our wings as as we're moving, we usually move in one direction or another. But this very much goes with IFS, where we have different parts that need to show up, in our process, in our lives. When we were moving around a lot, my 6 was dominant. That's the loyalist, right? And her core need is security. And that was something that's very difficult to have when you're moving around every 2 years. So,
Right, right, right.
yeah.
Right, so does it feel like you're back at your 2, or do you feel like you're somewhere else? Like, now that you're more grounded, now that you've been hanging out in Virginia more, like, what does it feel like where do you feel like you are on
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I had, definitely a hiatus from my 2. So typically once we move anywhere, or when we moved here, I should say, I noticed at the 2.5-year mark, and I think it was 2.5 because it was like, "Okay, are we about to pack up and move again?"
Right.
There was some parts of me that were kind of anticipating it. Um, and so around 2.5 years, I noticed this, my helper, coming back online and being like, "Okay, we're settled. I can I can give more now that I feel secure,
Mm,
now that I feel grounded, and rooted, and I've got amazing friends here, and so forth that are pouring into me. So now I have a
mm.
capacity to pour back out." Mhm.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's beautiful. Um, yeah, one of my friends was telling me that, like, when I talk about the Enneagram, I tend to talk about, like, the negative stuff of all the I'm like, "So you're a 1, so you always think you're right." Instead of, like, you can be a 2 and be a really, like, healthy, loving,
Yeah.
helpful, like, 2, and it can come from a different place.
Yeah, the unburdened 2, right? Or the
Yeah.
unburdened 3. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Um, what about this idea of how do we begin to notice either like who's doing the praying or who wants to do the praying or like kind of what parts are involved with with the like either wanting to establish a practice or doing the practice.
Yeah. I talked earlier about my parts that have a limitation in tolerating God's immense goodness. And not to get it too much into the weeds of my story, that but the work I've been able to do with those parts in prayer have showed me that that's from a neglect wound. And in bringing those anxious and avoidant parts into God's care, even if it's from a distance, right? So that's sometimes like if I'm multitasking and praying, that can feel better for those parts. That's a way of self care, to help increase that tolerance for the capacity of His goodness for those parts. And this is where self leadership. It's like I'm helping these parts recognize that God is still happy with them. God is still delighting in them, even though I'm busy with my hands or I'm walking, um, and not just sitting and praying. So one way that I care for those parts is by helping them see God's compassion. And my prayer is for God to keep growing their capacity through experiencing His patience, His love, and mine. Right, that those because they're anxious avoidant, it really does help for core self to be that mediator, at times when they aren't so trusting or just extra anxious about, like, too much goodness.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So it's like there's a lot involved in there's a lot of us involved in the prayer where it's like what the
Yeah,
self is like God's there, self is there, and the parts are there. Like I love that.
yeah,
I love how you just said that. It was really beautiful.
yeah. Yeah, and, anxiety gets exiled a lot, especially in prayer, and, like, whether it's just the overuse, of the fixing part that prays. So, like, if my fixer is praying, she's gonna be like, "God, please take away this anxiety. Please help me feel better. Help me, help me, help me, help me," which is beautiful. It is one way to pray. But if that's the only way that we're praying for ourselves, then we're missing out on the abundant life that I believe that Jesus actually invites us to. So when when we notice who inside is praying, then we become that parts detector in our prayer life. And when we pray for ourselves, instead of having the agenda, right, we can unblend from our fixer or self improvement task force or whatever agenda is showing up in prayer. If it's about maybe praying for the world or praying for other people, like a lot of times those prayers are very burdened. And so unblending from those parts in order to pray from self. And, when we pray from self, um, the it just has a whole different tone. Um, I actually have an example here because I was like, I might not be able to do this on the fly, so I typed it out. So it might sound like this if we have a self-led prayer for our anxiety or our anxious parts. Lord, infuse my anxious parts with your presence. When I feel anxious, help me pause and listen to the inner alarm and comfort the need or the desire inside. Please use my anxiety to draw me closer to you, and may your spirit remind these anxious parts of me that you are always with all of me, not just the parts of me that trust you and that are not worried. That gentleness, like, in Matthew 11, Jesus says, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. Come to me, all those who labor. Our anxious parts are labored, right? And he says, learn from me. I am gentle, right? And that's the self energy that everybody has access to.
Yeah, as you're saying that, I'm just feeling this, like, other parts of me that have other beliefs, right, around Jesus or around God, or, like, these other parts that have these other, like, "Is that true?" Like, can yeah, that's what's happening for me right now. I'm like, "Is that true? Like, can we believe that? Can we trust that?" Like, that's yeah, in real time, that's what's happening for me. Yeah, I'm and then I can say to those parts, "I'm hearing that, and I'm loving that my parts are sharing that with me."
Mhm. Exactly. Those are the parts in the lower levels that oftentimes get neglected because, like you so beautifully put it earlier, sometimes we turn our back. We're in this beautiful level 5, level 6 space of, the IFS world. And it's like, oh, I don't want to listen. I don't want to listen to that. I don't want to listen to the doubt or, wondering if I can really trust this goodness. And those are the parts that are I visualize if I'm looking down through that stairwell and I see those level 2 and level 1 parts looking up, longing for what's up there, right? And they're still down at those lower levels, or if, as the model teaches, they're in the basement possibly.
Mhm. Yeah, and what a different image of me, like, as you say that, I just had a really different experience of, like, instead of me looking down, like, "Are you serious? We're really going back to, like, can we believe and can we trust? Like, really? Or we're already back there?" And but as you say that, I looking down, I'm like, "Oh, these no parts left behind." Like, this idea of these parts, like, looking up at me with this longing, and then my heart just softened immediately, like, "Oh, yeah, guys. Oh my gosh." Like, I want to be with them. I want to not help them in sort of an urgent agent, agenda helping, but just to, like, wanting to connect to them. I can feel that as you described that, I feel a shift.
Yeah. Yeah, they don't wanna feel so alone either. Right. Yeah. And that they carry these beliefs. I mean, some of them are I became a Christian when I was 12, first of all. So I was in that developmental stage where everything had to be black and white. I'm not so sure that the pastor was actually teaching it that way in hindsight, but that is definitely how I interpreted it. And so all that black and white thinking that it was burdening me um, big time, right? And it was impacting how I did therapy in my early 20s as well. So it's worth going back and looking at that stuff because it's bogging us down in more
Mm,
ways than we probably realize.
yeah, yeah. We're gonna have to go in a few minutes. Is there anything else? I mean, I know we could keep talking about this, but is there anything else you would like to say around like, kind of noticing our parts, noticing our personality, learning about that, and then having that inform our prayer lives.
Yeah. I think maybe just, emphasizing, taking another highlighter to what we've already been saying and, um, meeting ourselves where we are in our prayer life without shame, and therefore having the opportunity using IFS to build a better relationship with our inner critics, knowing that they really do want good for us and, being able to even see how God adores our inner critics. It's some for some, it's unconceptualizing, or inconceivable, right? Yeah, yeah. But those parts wanna be unburdened too, and unburdening isn't this magical thing that I think a lot of times in the model, it gets kinda put up on a pedestal as this, someday will unburden, as opposed to this idea, like in Psalm I think it's Psalm 55, talks about cast your cares on the Lord. Like, God's been inviting us to unburden for thousands and thousands of years. So there's nothing new under the sun in that regard. So I think these parts that sometimes seem stuck in lower levels, they're ready to unburden a lot of times. They just need some airtime.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. It's so, hopeful. So
Yeah.
hopeful. And so speaking of hopeful, what you and your husband are doing a conference or workshop or something. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So August, next month. Oh my gosh.
So if you're listening
Um,
in real time, it's 2025. So August
Thank
2025.
you.
Yeah.
Thanks, yeah. So yeah, I think this is the fruit of what you were talking about earlier of our 2 parts coming out. My husband's a 1 with a 2 wing. And so he's in private practice. He's also an IFS therapist, level 3 trained. And we're ready to bring IFS to Lynchburg. The universities here, they teach it. It's in their core curriculum as it is in most universities now. The counseling departments, and we have about 6 universities in Lynchburg. Most people don't know that about Lynchburg. It's a
Wow.
pretty high academic area. And there's a lot of counseling centers in the area. We're very saturated with especially Christian counseling, but lots of different kind of counseling is happening here. So we're just ready to introduce it here. It's a Christian-focused, workshop. It's gonna be offered online, virtually, as well as in person, because Lynchburg is not the easiest place to get to, by flight anyway. So, yeah, we're excited. It's gonna be 2 days, and, people can find more information on my website.
That's awesome. Awesome. And then do you think you'll do the parts in prayer retreat again next year?
Yeah, so it's scheduled for April, and that's gonna
Okay.
be in Greensboro, North Carolina. There's a prayer center right outside there called St. Francis Springs Prayer Center.
Hmm.
They have the most beautiful prayer center I have ever, ever, ever been to.
Hmm.
The glass chapel in the woods, trails all throughout the property, a huge prayer labyrinth. They have mass every Sunday. It's St. Francis's life is very evident
Hmm.
in that place. For those that don't know, Saint Francis was a lover of nature.
Oh, okay. Great.
Yes.
Um, so my last question, Julie, from before we go is if you had to do something else, something different in your life than you're doing, you could do anything you wanted, what would you do? What would you do differently?
I would want to, be a professional landscaper. I love working with plants, so I'd wanna, like, work in a nursery,
Mm,
and, just learn about how every plant has its unique need,
mm,
and how some plants don't like other plants. It just reminds me of parts.
I
And
love that.
so I I don't know, when I pray in my garden, it's oftentimes a space where I like to just sit and listen to my garden grow, so to speak. Like I'm listening to my
Aw.
inner landscape or soulscape and
Mm,
listening to that grow and listening to my garden grow. And
mm,
yeah, just when I am outside in the dirt, um, there's definitely a connection to God and his creation and feeling like a co-creator with him, and that's, of
Hmm.
course, where I said, like, my improvement task force gets to really have fun. So, yeah, I feel like I'm helping the plants, but I'm also, like, creating this beauty. It's I don't know, it's
Mm.
so much joy.
I love that. I love that. It sounds great. I'm like, I'm gonna invite you to come to New Hampshire, and you can help me with my landscaping, and I'll even make you popcorn.
Yes, please. Oh, you would?
I
You'd make
would.
me
I would. Yeah, that
popcorn.
would be the like. You come up, do that. I'll make you
Oh,
popcorn.
you are a true friend.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Tammy. Yeah.
Thanks for hanging out with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love it if you left a rating, a review, a like, comment, share with your family, your friends. That would mean so much to me. My book is available at your favorite independent bookstore or on Amazon. You can visit my website, tammysallenberger.com, or you can download a free Get to Know a Should part of you. You can follow me at IFS Tammy on Instagram and at The One Inside on Facebook and on YouTube. Jeff Shrum co-produces The One Inside, and I am forever grateful for Jeff. Also thankful for Jack Reardon for creating the music, and just thank you for listening. 6 seasons, over 1 million downloads. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you in this community. I'll see you next time.